Hi, I'm Russell Sturgis. I'm the founder and principal of the Centre for Western Mindfulness. Welcome to the sixth in a series of blogs that I've been doing on forgiveness this year. In this particular blog, I'm looking at self-forgiveness as a concept and go into explaining how the dimensions of forgiveness also can be applied and used in the situation of self-forgiveness. I thought I'd like to share from my own experience a key approach to self-forgiveness that most of us will be dealing with probably on a reasonably regular basis. And it's got to do with, effectively it's got to do with shame. And it's shame of failure invariably. And I want to give you some tools for being able to apply forgiveness in those sort of situations. So some of you may be familiar with the fact, but probably many of you aren't, that going back 20 years ago, I used to be 143 kg, which is over 50 kg heavier than what I am now. And during that time of being obese, I tried many diets and things in order to lose weight. And if any of you have been in this situation, I'm sure there's many of you listening that have, you would do the diets, you would lose the weight, you would look fantastic, feel fantastic, and then something would happen and you'd fall off the wagon, so as to speak, and then next thing you start having a couple of little sweet things or whatever it is that is your particular penchant for helping to put on weight, and next thing you know it, you're back into doing what you've always done, and compounded by the fact that there's a huge amount of shame having not succeeded in keeping the weight off, not having succeeded in maintaining an approach to your lifestyle that would have you stay healthy and well. And of course, once the shame kicks in, then it compounds the need for comfort eating in this particular model. And so you find yourself putting on more weight than what you had when you started. And this was certainly the case for me in my experience, was that many times just the reaction to the shame was enough to have me complicate the whole situation in terms of what was going on there. So I developed a very aware approach to my management of weight, which came primarily as a mechanism of making more self-loving choices. So instead of rigid discipline and sticking to diets, it was about becoming aware through gaining better knowledge and understanding of my own particular health idiosyncrasies, and then making loving choices around the food that I was eating. And as a result of that, over a period of 20 years with a combination of right choices of food and exercise, I was able to reduce my weight and sustain that, and have done so for quite some time. What happens, though, is that every once in a while curveballs are thrown, and we are presented with challenging situations that impact on us physically or emotionally or mentally that really cause a lot of stress in one form or another. And of course, the neural pathway in our brain associated with stress management was that mechanism that resulted in us eating in ways, for example, and I'm just talking purely about this particular response, and there's a whole lot of different ways that people can respond, in nurturing ways to help give you comfort during these times of stress and suffering. And that neural pathway, even though it has become almost a shadow in terms of it existing, because the new neural pathways of healthy choices have become so entrenched now and are so strong, you kind of think that you're invincible until a major stressor comes along. And what happens is that little sneaky neural pathway that's been sitting there not functioning all of a sudden pops up its head. So just recently I was in the situation where my mother passed away, and I was close to my mum, and the impact on me was, like it would be on anybody, was that it triggered grief and sadness and that sense of loss. And they're stressors. In one form or another, they function as stressors. And even though I could rationalize in my mind, I had a philosophy that was accepting, even though a whole lot of it could be managed, the fact remained that the truth of my emotional experience was this sense of loss and grief. An interesting thing happened, was that little sneaky old neural pathway popped up its head, and I was going through a grocery store and they had scorched almonds on special. And I thought, oh yeah, I think I might get some scorched almonds. And so, and this initial response was an old subconscious pattern that just all of a sudden resurfaced. So it was habitual, and it was a habit that hadn't surfaced for a long time. And all of a sudden, here it was, it had popped to the surface. And just for a fleeting moment, I had this moment where I went, oh no, I don't choose to eat that. And I thought, no, right now I think I'll have some scorched almonds. So I bought the scorched almonds, and the immediate response then was to go into the old pattern of how those would be eaten, which would be for them to be consumed en masse quite quickly. And that began to happen. In terms of, it was sort of like I was taking like 3 or 4 scorched almonds at a time out of the packet. And then all of a sudden, I caught myself. All of a sudden, I realised I was able to step back into being the observer and realise that I'd gone into subconscious programming, and I was doing what I had always done in order to cope with my stressors, which was primarily resort to some form of pleasure, which for me primarily was about carbohydrates, starchy carbohydrates and sugars, which was responsible for an incredible increase in weight. Now, in that moment, when the realization of my behavior became truly evident to me, in the past, I would have had a tendency to go down the route of feeling shame about having behaved in that way. But given what I understood about the principles of self-forgiveness, what I applied was an approach of self-forgiveness. And that was to stop in that moment and just fully observe the behavior and recognize what the behavior was about. And it was about really being able to see that this was about me being in a place of suffering or a place of stress, and this had become my response. And then it was about considering the fact that this wasn't the most loving choice that I could make in terms of going down this route. And so instead of beating myself up for having made a poor choice, it was about stepping back and going, well, this is about an old pattern that's resurfaced, and I know that this isn't really serving me. And so in this moment, I'm in a position where I have the choice to make a more loving determination around how to relate to this moving forward from this point. And so as I stopped and considered this, I thought, I'm still needing that little bit of comfort. So it wasn't denying what was there, But instead of going down the route of having to eat 4 or 5 of them at a time, I thought, okay, I'll just have one. And so for the rest of that day, and it may have been at 1 or 2 out of intervals, I just chose one. And that was easy to do. And when I got to the end of the day, I realised that that even with taking those ones, it was just purely habit. It actually wasn't achieving anything really, other than the fact of fulfilling the expectations of a very old and deeply entrenched habit from the past. And so as I moved forward into the next day, I was able to come to that place where the thing that would be loving for me moving forward at this point is not to have any more of these, that it doesn't serve me or anybody else, for that matter, around me, for me to continue to consume these sugars in this way. And so without having to use discipline or force or regret, I was able to say, I'm going to make the loving choice of not having any more of these, and just very easily and comfortably was able to move on without having to go in search of more sugars, in search of more comforting food in order to help ease the impact of the stress and the suffering of grief that I was experiencing at that particular time. Now, it's about going to that place and recognising, and this is where self-forgiveness comes in, it's recognising that that was an old pattern of behaviour that had existed from many years ago. In fact, that was entrenched into me from a very early age, and that I had resorted to a very old pattern of behaviour for which I had an alternative. And so I was able to stop and step back and reflect on the changes that had taken place in my life over the last couple of decades in terms of making more loving choices, and how I felt and the difference it made in my body, and to be able to really sit in the place of appreciation of having that awareness. And more to the point, that I could sit and look at that experience of what had happened after my mother's passing and go, okay, so these are the things that sort of surfaced within me in terms of my desire to want to partake of sugar and the sorts of things that I knew were comforting for me, and that next time I'm presented with this situation, I can be more aware of the fact that I don't have to go down that route. And having experienced this, I can be grateful for what I've just experienced, because it's highlighted that there is the potential for me to revert to those old behaviours again. And so having had that experience, being able to be more mindful during the experience, not denying the experience, but being the observer of it, was able to bring me to the place where I could be more self-loving again in my choices. Self-forgiveness is about, ultimately, for many of us, is about dealing with our shame. And it's about selective remembering, and I talk about this within the actual written blog. It's the idea of being able to see what's happened and go, hang on a second, I can relate to this experience differently. And the key is to find the gratitude for it. The key is to find, well, what's the gift in this for me moving forward? And of course, the gift for me was the reminder that even though I've done years and years of work of mindfulness, it was still quite possible for that old neural pathway, that old pattern of response to a stressor, to surface, even with the years of work that I've done on being more aware and mindful around how I approach dealing with stress and dealing with suffering. And so I want to invite you and encourage you to read the blog that accompanies this video, and just reflect on how you can incorporate self-forgiveness, given that this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we face in our world, is this idea of self-forgiveness, in order to be able to bring our lives back into that place of living with mindfulness, of the fact that we have a choice to be loving and kind to ourselves, to others, and to the planet. And as I said in the blog, the greater the capacity that we have to be kind and forgiving to ourselves, the greater we have the capacity to be kind and loving to other people. Thanks for tuning in again into this series. There will be another one in the forgiveness series next month. If you'd like to know more about what it is that we do here, please check out our Facebook page and our website, and I'll speak to you again very shortly. Bye.